Welcome back, guys, to another PvP guide. In this edition, we'll be taking a look at the 5.10 Fury Marauder. Now, this guide is more for beginners, however, I would love for you more advanced players out there to provide feedback, so please leave me a comment below. If I do get anything drastically wrong, I'll go ahead and leave an annotation to get that fixed. I'll try to keep this video short, however, in case you guys want to jump around to a certain section, I will include timestamps to certain portions of the video. Now, before we get into the actual guide, I would like to go over some of the 5th expansion era Marauder changes. The Marauder is a 3 DPS spec class, meaning it has 3 DPS trees versus the other class. This is also true for the sniper. That 3rd DPS tree was always meant to be a hybrid spec. That's kind of the way they designed it. It was good at sustained DPS and good at burst DPS. This is what I mean by hybrid. Prior to the 5th expansion, that role was filled by the Carnage Marauder. It was good at sustained DPS as well as burst. Once 5.0 dropped, and through the actual entirety of the expansion, is they started nerfing Carnage, and many players didn't understand why. It wasn't until, I think, 5.4, I could be wrong on this, but they released a post titled Target DPS. And they out specifically in there, though they never directly mention it, they never directly tell us, you can read that Fury is now what they call the quasi-burst. Meaning it's the hybrid spec, but it seems to be leaning more towards burst. And this is the main reason why a lot of Carnage players have gone over to Fury, because it does fill that role, and because they tried to lower the sustainability of Carnage, they kind of, in my opinion, kind of broke the flow of it. It just doesn't feel the same as it used to be. And I'm not talking strictly damage numbers here, I'm just talking about the way the class plays and the way it flows. Now, don't get me wrong, Carnage is still a good class and I do play it every once in a while. It's just now just strictly a burst class and isn't the same as it used to be. That role is now filled by Fury. And let's be real, having the CC immunity on Fury makes it even more desirable in PvP. I will go ahead and link that post in the description in case you guys want to see it. But without further ado, let's get into the actual guide. First up, we're going to start talking about gear. Now, there's the main stat priority that we're going to look at is alacrity and critical. There are several tiers, or there are several ways that you can do this. And I will go over each one so that you can have your own preference. You're going to have to test it for yourself. Now, before we get into the actual stats, however, I do want to mention that if you're lower geared, if you're in 230s, you're going to want to do your stat testing to try to hit your targets on the Rishi stronghold so that you can have access to bolster, because with bolster at 252, there's a huge jump between 230 and all the way up to 258. So your stats and whatever item that you're using to give that certain stat may change over the course of your gearing. So it's best to look at a bolster to make sure that you're hitting your exact target that you need to. Now, the first tier that we're going to talk about, the first alacrity tier, is the low alacrity. And what you're going to want is at least 703 alacrity. And the reason is alacrity makes everything better, makes everything faster, makes dots tick faster, it makes things come off cooldown faster, and it makes your global cooldown faster. The only difference for global cooldown is that global cooldown works in tiers, it works in steps, it rounds to the nearest point, the nearest tenth of a number. So let's say you have enough alacrity where you should have you have enough alacrity to have 1.41, you're still going to round up to 1.5. So you need to go ahead and break these certain target points. And the first target point to go from 1.5 to 1.4 is 703 alacrity. Now, as this is a very high burst spec class and is definitely leaning more towards burst, this is what I personally suggest for DPS as a Fury Marauder, especially in PvP. Obviously, if you PvE, that's a little different. You're gonna want that high alacrity. So to get that, you just need a couple of pieces. Now, normally what I do is if you're low gear, you want to swap out your boots and change it to alacrity, and if you need to, you can also get the earpiece. Once you get up to about 252, you can go ahead and switch them back to critical. Now, most of the other stats you want to get is in critical, and you want anywhere between roughly 2200 to 2500. Now, in my opinion, 2500 is a little high. It's a little bit waste because you're pushing severely into the diminishing returns. So I suggest keep it around. Right now, as you can see, I've been a lot of gear testing. So right now, currently, I'm just sitting at nearly 2400. But I do suggest having at least 2200. For everything else, apologize for that, just adjusting the music there, it's a little loud. For everything else, I would suggest putting in a mastery. As you can see, I have a couple of mastery augments just to fill it out. If you can't afford the 236, then try to get what you can get with your 228 augments. But I would definitely suggest at least getting to 236 augments. The next alacrity tier you want to hit, if you want to use the high one, it definitely makes you faster, makes your global cooldown down to 1.3, is 1860. You need at least 1860, and I believe that's around 15.4%. Don't quote me on that exact number, but it is 15 point something percent. And that'll bump you down to 1.3 global cooldown. Now, if that is the way you choose to go, you need to make sure that you dump everything else into critical. You need to get that critical back as high as you can get. So in that situation, you're not going to be running any mastery augments. Now, the trade-off between mastery and critical is you want to get your critical as high as you can get it within reason, and then dump the rest in the mastery, and mastery will raise your base stats back up. Plus, it does give you a small boost in your actual critical chance. It doesn't give you full critical, it just gives you critical chance. But I would suggest at least having enough critical to get your critical chance to about 45%. I'm not going to go over specific, okay, you should have this and this piece and this and this piece. One, because they, again, as you gear up through the ratings, it's going to change. And two, because of the new 252, 258s, they do lock them into place. So as you can see here, I still have a 248 enhancements because right here, when I first started gearing, I would have alacrity, and then now I have critical in there. Same thing with the earpiece. With everything else, I kept the same. I would suggest keeping one accuracy enhancement, and I keep that in the gloves, and this is just to make sure that you don't miss. One of your big hits, Fury Strike, is white damage, so if you miss that, it's gonna hinder you pretty well. And just to cover some of the enemy players, most players have a 5% default defense chance. PTs have 8%, I believe, and Sorks have 10%. So at least getting yourself to 104, 105 is still, in my opinion, still required. However, it is up to you how you want to gear. If you want to drop the accuracy, go for it. But just with the new gear tiers and since we can go up to 258, I would suggest keeping one, because we have such a large stat pool now that we're pushing into several different diminishing returns, so it does help to have one in there. With that, I think we covered gear, so we can move on to utilities. Oh, wrong button. Alright, I'm going to be going over what I suggest for regular PvP as well as solo rank. So I will be making several suggestions on which I use for which. First up, we have Inexorable. We don't need the Rage, but still lowering your CC breaker by 30 seconds is still, in my opinion, the best one out of anything else in this tree, so that's definitely a must. The next is Brazen, and that increases your damage reduction, as well as when you get attacked, you build 2 Fury. And as a Marauder, no matter what spec you're playing, Fury is a must. You need to have your Berserk. So this is definitely a must. The next skill tree, the next rank, Masterful, I take Phantom, and this is, I personally like high mobility, and having Phantom is a great way to stay on target, as well as helping you to use your Force Camo as an offensive cooldown as well as a defensive cooldown. However, in solo ranked, this one can be dropped. The next one is Subjugation. This allows you to use Obfuscate at 6 meters. It also allows it reduces the cooldown, which makes a next utility even more powerful. So this is an absolute must, as you can use it more often. And being able to use Cloak of Pain while stunned, it's a bonus. It's not really a necessity. But Obfuscate, in case you don't know, is your main de-accuracy. It lowers your accuracy of your opponent by 90%, and it's also tied to a really powerful utility later. The next one I think is Relentless, and this causes Predation to no longer require or consume Fury, but instead will go on a 30-second cooldown. This is definitely a must no matter what you're doing. The high mobility without having to waste your Fury is a must. It's pretty self-explanatory. In the Heroic, I take Unbound, and this allows Predation to purge movements. It basically purges roots, and it also increases the speed by another 30% for a total of 80%. This is also a must for your high mobility. In solo ranked, let me go back one tier real quick. In solo ranked, you can take this. This is good to help you stay alive, defensive role, but it's honestly not required in regs. This is up to you. If you're noticing you're dying a lot in solo ranked, then this might help you out. So you could drop Phantom for that, but I wouldn't. There's a better utility that we could take instead of this. The next one, back to Heroic. The next one I would suggest is Expunging Camouflage. Expunging Camo removes all cleansable effects. Again, this is like, it'll purge more roots. So every time you force camo, if you get rooted, with Force Camo and Predation, it gives you 2 root breakers that you can use, and it's especially useful against snipers. In my opinion, it's a must. Again, you can drop this utility for another one. Another good one is increases the duration of Undying Rage by 2 seconds and reduces the cooldown by 30 seconds. I know some people like to take this for solo ranked, but I personally don't, for the sheer fact that you're in arenas and it's shorter, but this is a very good utility, so that's up to you. Brooding, I would not suggest Brooding. Alright, in the legendary tier, this is literally your most powerful utility, Ruthless Aggressor. Vicious Throw refunds 2 rage when used on a target affected by your Obfuscate, and can be used on any target affected. Can be used regardless amount of any health. Additionally, activated Obfuscate grants Ruthless Aggressor, which reduces the damage you take from force and tech attacks by 75% for 6 seconds. So this gives you 75% damage reduction against yellow damage. This is absolutely a must, and it allows you to use Obfuscate on classes such as Sorks or Concealment Operatives, where they're doing nothing but white damage. Another good utility to take for solo ranked is Blood Ward. Blood Ward gives you a CC immunity. It also heals you whenever you're attacked. So this is great for solo ranked. In regs, I don't take it because it's only usable once every 3 minutes, and it's kind of a waste, and we definitely have a lot better ones. Some people do take the, where is it at? Mad Dash one through Victory. That's also a very good one. I personally don't take it because I do take Expunging Camo and the break on Predation. So if you have any other suggestions on utilities, but this is basically what I take. Next, let's move on to the rotation. Now the rotation is not straight up. The way that I view the rotation is more as priority system. You basically are in 3 different phases. The first phase is like your ramp up phase, then you have your burst phase, and then you have your filler phase. Sure, PvE, yeah, you have a specific rotation, but the thing you have to understand with PvP is that the situation is always changed. You're going to be rooted, you're going to be stunned, you're going to be thrown around, your target's going to die. And so sticking to a particular rotation on any class really is kind of a no-no. You need to be adaptable and you need to adjust to your situation. So the way I view it as PvP is that there are 3 phases, okay? The first phase is your ramp up phase. Now we need to talk about there are 6 abilities in your ramp up phase. However, you're only going to be doing 3 of them because they're going to be activated a certain way. The first one is your primer. And by the way, these are in no particular order. The first one is going to be your primer, and you have Force Crush, which activates your shockwave, or I'm sorry, it's called Destruction now. And this increases your Raging Burst and Smash by 15% and making them consume no rage. So this happens on both Force Crush and Berserk. Now you need to alternate them. Every time you do a rotation, you're going to switch which one you do. So you have Force Crush and Berserk. The next ramp up thing is to get where is it? Dominate. And this makes your next Smash or Raging Burst an auto crit. And that is triggered off of Force Charge as well as Obliterate. So these ones you don't really need to alternate because Obliterate has a nice low cooldown. So you don't really need to alternate these, and you don't need to stick to it. If someone's running from you, don't be afraid to go ahead and use an extra Force Charge or an extra Obliterate just to get to your target. It's most important to stay to your target. So this is the next set of ramp up. The last one that you're gonna want to do is to proc your set bonus, your 6 set bonus. For some reason, because I just logged in, it's not showing, but your 6 sec bonus makes your Fury Strike an auto crit once a minute whenever you do Dual Saber Throw or Ravage. So you're going to want to throw that in there. Even though it only hits 1 minute, you just want to get into the habit of doing it so that it's there every time you do it. And once you do those three things, you're set up for your burst phase. Now your burst phase is going to be your Fury Strike and Raging Burst. Now in PvE, they do things differently. But in PvP, I found it better to do Fury Strike first, followed by Raging Burst. And this is because you have 2 talents here. One is called Cascading Power. Increases all damage dealt for 5% for 6 seconds after dealing damage with Smash or Raging Burst. You also have Furious Rage. Furious Strike grants Furious Rage, increasing your critical damage bonus of your next Smash or Raging Burst by 15%. Now this one lasts, I think, it doesn't say, but I think it lasts 12 to 15 seconds. So in PvE you can do rotation. So when you do your Raging Burst and then your Fury Strike, your first Raging Burst is not going to get this proc, but everyone after that. However, because such of the volatile nature of PvP, it is my opinion that you want to do Fury Strike first, because if you get stunned once, that proc is going to fall off for your next Raging Burst, and to get that 15% is more viable than getting that 5%. So you want to do Fury Strike first, followed by a Raging Burst. After you complete that finishes your burst phase, and you move on to the filler phase. And basically, once you become good and competent in your rotation and your abilities, you can start blending your filler phase and your primer phase. And basically, your main abilities will reset will kind of lower the cooldown of Raging Burst, Obliterate, and Fury Strike. And these abilities are Assault, Battering Assault, Vicious Slash, Sweeping Slash, Force Scream, Vicious Throw, and Fury Strike. Reduce the active cooldown of Smash and Raging Burst and Obliterate by 1 second. So your filler is going to be Force Scream, which after you charge, you're going to have a free Force Scream. Is going to be Vicious Slash, if you have it, Vicious Throw, and Battering Assault. Now, when to use Battering Assault, you want to use Battering Assault whenever you're on a Force Crush rotation, because it's going to require Rage. When you do Berserk phase, it gives you Fury, so you want to save your Battering Assault for that. Now that we got the basic understanding of our rotation, let's talk about doing it. The way I open up is most of the time, I use Berserk first. And that is because if you start with Force Crush, you may not have enough Rage left over to get you to 30 stacks of Fury to be able to move on to your next rotation. It all depends on the nature of the match you're in. So what I like to do is I like to start with Berserk and then do that full rotation and then move on to Force Crush. However, if you think you're going to be CC'd using a Force Crush to get that CC immunity, you can start with that. That is up to you. So the way that I do it to start off is I open with Frenzy to get my 30 stacks, use a Berserk, Force Charge in, then I'll do Ravage to proc my set bonus, as well as proccing my relics, and then I'll do a Fury Strike and a Raging Burst, and then I'll move into my filler phase of Force Scream. I'll use whatever ability. Another good ability to use in the filler phase is Crippling Slash, and it adds a trauma and reduces the target's healing by 28% for 10 seconds, so it's really good for fighting a healer. So now that I talked to it, I'm gonna go ahead and do a rotation to show you what it looks like. So Frenzy, Berserk, Force Charge, Ravage, Fury Strike, Raging Burst, Force Scream. I'm going to go ahead and apply Force Crush, blending my things together. Dual Saber Throw. I'm going to go ahead and slash. I need Rage, so I'm going to Battering Assault, Fury Strike, and Raging Burst. And then it resets. Yeah, and that is kind of what your rotation looks for. Or I'm sorry, looks like. And that pretty much covers the rotation. I hope you enjoyed this guide, and I hope it was insightful. If I forgot anything, please let me know. And I'd like to see more Fury Marauders out there. We'll see you next time, guys.